Welcome to the Promise Podcast, where we discuss how brands can deliver on their promise with a great customer experience and business impact. I'm your host, Harald Lamberts, and in each episode, I talk to business executives, thought leaders, and founders about how to achieve effective collaboration across departments, such as brand, marketing, product development, customer experience, and support, all with one goal in mind: a seamless customer journey with great business results. Today, in this episode, I'm excited to welcome Adam Lawrence, well-known service design expert and author of This is Service Design Doing book that you might well know. Welcome, Adam. Pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Harold. It's great to be here.
Yeah, good
Really
to see
excited.
you, Adam. I was just thinking, we never actually met, but of course I know you from LinkedIn and conferences and what have you. Before we dive in and I do your proper introduction, always the first question I ask people is, what is a favorite brand of yours that really delivers on their promise to you?
There are lots that I really love. These days, when we think about brands, we often think about more than just our experience, but also what's said about them much more and so on. So some of my favorites have been maybe darkened in the last few years with things we learned about them. But one that I love very, very much is the THW, the THW. Now, not many people outside Germany or its neighboring countries might know that, but it's an organization. You might sometimes go through Germany and see like fire trucks driving by, but not red, blue ones and other kinds of amazing equipment and so on. And THW is the Technisches Hilfswerk. It's the technical aid organization. And they're kind of a disaster relief thing. They're actually, I think, umbrellaed by the federal government, but they're all volunteers, 97% volunteers. Okay. And these are the folks, when you have a disaster or a crisis, they show up in these blue trucks, and they're people like you and me volunteering, but they have expertise about feeding people really fast, about repairing this kind of machine or unblocking that kind of blockage in the water system and so on. And every time you see these blue vans, you feel, that's really cool. I feel safer. I know they're here. I know they're helping. And I know they are volunteers. They're people like you and me. And that's a really, really strong thing, I think. And
there's also a lot of appreciation in that, I guess. Huh?
I think so. And because it's a very large organization as well, many, many thousands of volunteers, many of us also know somebody who volunteers there. So I've got a friend, he's a telecom executive, but at the weekends, he's got his blue suit on and he's out there helping people out, running pumps or clearing up after fires or feeding people somewhere in the forest. It's an amazing organization and a very strong brand, I think.
That's cool. I mean, just knowing that all these people are like purpose-driven to do this, I guess, and also makes it really authentic and valuable to know that this is your. Yeah, cool.
And I think lots of government or peri-government organizations around the world, people feel distance from them. Yeah. Which I don't always get, but I can see where it comes from. And with these folks, they're your colleagues, they're folks from next door. And that's a very powerful message, I think.
Yeah, maybe they can learn something from that. Who knows?
Maybe.
Cool. All right, let me do your proper introduction. Adam St. John Lawrence has always been active in the interplay between business and education. As a part-time comedian, but also professor at the IE Business School, he tries to also engage talent to learn and improve. By organizing global service jams and as the co-author of the book, This is Service Design Doing, he is a well-known figure in the field of service design and beyond. That's why I'm excited to have you on the Promise Podcast. Adam, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Just one
Does
correction.
That make any sense? Or would you
that
add
makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, education has not always been my title, but it's always been a thing which I'm kind of doing.
That's what I meant, yeah.
Sometimes to my colleagues' annoyance. And I'm a professor in Spanish, not a professor in English. I'm an adjunct professor in English. I don't have that kind of academic qualification. But I love teaching at the IE. It's a fantastic school.
That's what I see when I see you. I see, a passion to engage, and I see a passion to share best practice and to make things better. Is that fair, or would you add something to that?
Absolutely. And what I really enjoy about that kind of work is, I don't want to sound saintly here in any way, but it's empowering people. When I teach people, for example, service design skills or whatever you call this stuff that we do, about going out of the building and meeting people and being curious and about trying experiments to see what works and so on, rather than just just making a snap judgment or even a considered one and then just pushing that through, but being more curious and down to earth. What I really often encounter is people who say, oh, I always wanted to work like this. I always wanted to be closer to the customer, the user, the citizen. I wanted to get out and do stuff and not spend my entire day pushing PowerPoint decks around. And it's really super motivating when someone says that to you. Thank you. I always wanted to work this way.
For sure.
And I see that, especially we run these global jam events, these big kind of hackathon type things, but they're more interested in understanding the problem and connecting the people. And we do one of them called the Global Gov Jam, which is actually my favorite. It's a big thing once a year. A mixture of citizens and public workers all over the world come together physically, usually in different locations around the world. And they've got 48 hours to design new public services or to design tools that would help public servants. And I love that because there's so many people that I see in public service who get this messaging all the time from the media, especially, you're too slow, you're too inflexible, you don't care about the citizen.
Stigma that is put on them.
Yeah, very strong. And that's one which I just cannot agree with, because the people that I meet in public service are super dedicated. They're just very large and complex organizations. Of course, they can't be especially agile compared to a smaller thing. Yeah. And to see these folks who've heard this all their life go into situations like that and get told by a citizen, hey, it's really cool that you're here, or get told by a cool designer person. That's a fantastic insight. Let's use that. Yeah. And you see these folks walk out.
Motivating for them, Or
they walk out 5 centimeters taller,
Yeah.
And I love that. I love it when people see, I can do something here and I can bring myself into this more.
Well, and if you can provide them with a toolbox to kind of work within those constraints or still achieve things, even though maybe it is a slow, big organization or complex, big organization to navigate, there's always something you can do. And so, but you might need specific tools to make it happen, or be creative on that. So I guess it's also rewarding to give people tools to enable them to actually do that. If you say they already have the energy to do it, it's just they need the tools maybe to do it successfully, I guess. Yeah.
I believe so.
This is public service, but if you describe it like that, I could actually just replace it with corporate, couldn't you? Because it's actually not that different if you say it like that.
Sure. I mean, I earned my spurs, I guess you could say. My first real job after university was at Honda, the world's largest engine manufacturer.
I saw it,
And I believe there were something like 300,000 people working there when I was there. And that's massive. There are countries that aren't much bigger than that. And seeing how an organization like that, which also works in hardware, which with massive factories and production lines and things that have a huge investment behind them, seeing how they make decisions and how they make change is really, really interesting, because fundamentally it always becomes a human issue. Of course, there's practicalities and logistics and technologies, but fundamentally, it's always about people at some point who decide this is what we're going to do.
100%,
Adam. I want to do.
I'm subscribing to that 100%. I mean, we're at Ascens, we're doing most of our work is around like journey management or transformation, customer-centric transformation, and I mean, it's rarely the tools or the data that is the issue. Yeah, it's usually always the cross-functional collaboration or the silos or governance that is kind of like the real complexity to address, or maybe to promote your work within that. Yeah, so I think that's very often stakeholder management related as well. So very recognized.
And we shouldn't pretend those things are not complex, because they are. Governance is a very complex thing, and there are technical issues. And everything is complex, and at some point it becomes a human thing, which is also complex, but it's sometimes a much more approachable and a much more, it's an issue which we need a different set of skills for.
That's the thing, right? The toolbox is not just canvases and methods. It's also stakeholder management tactics or stuff like that. Yeah, so that are equally, maybe even more valuable to have that, to convert actually that potential into impact. So. Is that something you teach as well? Not I know your books, of course, but maybe you can add something to that, to like the how to achieve the impact in the organizations, like the communication of your work. Can you maybe reflect on that a bit? Like maybe one or two examples of what?
Certainly. Well, for me, it's very much a behavior question. Yeah. And what kind of behavior is useful on the individual, on the team level, and how does the organization enable that kind of behavior? It's it always bugs me that, I understand why, but it bugs me that, for example, I don't need to ask my boss to use Excel, but I need to ask my boss to go out and talk to a customer. And arguably the second is more important than the first, actually having that contact, running experiments and so on. The root of the work that I do at the behavioral level and also at the impact level is what we call at the Jams hashtag doing, not talking. So we're not against talking, of course, but the fact that by doing things together, we can communicate in much different ways and we can be much more grounded in reality than when we try to think our way out of problems. And it's really amazing to see how teaching people some doing behavior, whether it's at the individual level, the team level, or the organizational level, is incredibly, it's powerful and sobering at the same time, because we realize that a lot of our very high thinking, while valuable, gets easily detached away from the reality that our customers live in, that our partners live in, and that our employees live in. Yep. So often the stuff I do is about stuff like as simple as doing more prototyping. Yeah, whether that's on a cardboard model level or a massive expensive pilot or a simulation. It's about getting out of the building more and having conversations and being able to observe people and so on, find out what's actually going on out there. And of course where's the KPI for that? How does that work in terms of billable hours and all the kinds of things that my clients often think about? That's a very interesting combination between very simple human behavioral needs and the struggles of managing a large organization and paying for it all.
Yeah, but also I think in talking, you can think you agree, but you're actually saying different things very easily.
Words are very slippery.
In a cross-discipline, multidisciplinary collaboration, this is very often the case that you think you agree, and then actually when you put it on paper, you're like, oh, I thought you meant this. And so this is, I think, very common. So I think also putting things down also crosses, avoids or prevents that issue of things getting lost in translation a bit more. And, in your head, the constraints are not as strong as maybe when you put them down on paper. Yeah. So you can think your way out of things, but I think that's why also we believe in really getting things actionable and operational, because we also get clients, of course, asking us, we need to change our culture and we can have a CX day or we can have a customer-centric day. And I'm like, of course, it's great from a leadership perspective to maybe get, from a PR perspective, get some attention to that. But that one day doesn't stick, right? Like you really need to make sure that culture is in the behavior, is in the doing. Yeah. So like if it's by changing, making sure that teams on a daily basis start doing this and not once a year on the CX day. Yeah. So because then it's the only day, is almost like a hackathon is the norm for being a one-time event basically. And actually what you're trying to do, of course, is to adopt those practices more into your daily work so they become more structural. And that we see actually not enough. And that really needs almost like new working collaboration formats and habits and meeting rhythms, I guess, to get ingrained into the way of working of these teams. And
it does.
I don't know if if that sounds familiar or if you teach on that, but that's something we see at least. Is that something you can subscribe to?
Absolutely. There's a general belief in large parts of organizations that customer experience or design or whatever we call these things is something on top. That it's that old misunderstanding that design is what it looks like. Or customer experience is being nice to customers. And of course, it goes it's far more rooted than that. It goes far deeper than that. We know that customer experience is what people are willing to pay for. We know it's what makes them talk about us. They assume we're going to get the job done. They assume that's going to happen. And then how do we do it? Do we fit with their lives? Do we make them fit our lives? All these things are incredibly important to decisions. We've known that since the 80s and 90s. But then it's seen as a sprinkling you put on top, like a frosting on a cake. But no, it is what shape is the cake? Should it be a cake at all? Maybe it should be a sandwich. All these are questions which we need to address much more or much earlier in processes, not as a thing at the end. You mentioned that the sort of the customer excellence days, and I run those kind of things as well. Of course I do. It's a great way to get into organizations, and you can connect the right people, especially in these jam formats that we do.
Or inspire or accelerate things. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I once said to a client who wanted to give me I forget, it was called Design Day or something. I said, I'd much rather have 1 hour. And they said, 1 hour? And I said, but I want 1 hour per team per week.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
No, for sure.
And that will make the real difference. And that was suddenly very, very difficult to organize. But of course, organizing one day is easy. You can see the budget and so on. I understand why this is a pressure for people. But it comes from a basic misunderstanding of, I think, what organizations do. And there are so many organizations who are very, very product centered, and they believe their job is to make this product, and they become product factories or feature factories rather, and keep churning a thing out. And there's not enough connection to, is this actually useful to people? Is it useful in the right way?
But also terminology, I guess. I mean, we don't have to dive into this too much, but I mean, I know organizations that call their customer service department the customer experience department. Yeah, but that's very telling, of course, if your contact center is customer experience.
Yeah.
And then also others might feel, the digital software that or tools that they develop is customer experience, because that's where customers interact with. I mean, that's a very. So one executive we work with actually recently said, we started this CX program, he said, but actually it's not a CX program, it's a customer centricity program. I'm like, wow, that's a pretty good insight, because he understood, CX is actually just the outcome. Yeah. Yep. But what it really is about is making sure that everything we do is taking the customer insight as a starting point. Yeah. And so, I felt really happy when he said that, because I didn't tell him that. I mean, it was really an insight and a reflection from him after working with us for a couple of weeks or months. That he also. So I think there's also a lot of language issues there, but I think you can also remove that by putting things into practice on a structural basis.
That's part of this doing, not talking philosophy, which I talk about way too much. I'm sorry about that. But this idea that as long as we're using words, we're fundamentally misunderstanding each other. And when that turns into action, we suddenly start communicating on many, many more channels, and we get much more clarity, even if that clarity can't be expressed in words, which is interesting, about what's actually going on. I work here. Just down the road from me, there are some great sport fashion companies, and they have to deal with things that you can't put into words very easily. Like, what is that thing cool? Is it fashionable? I go down to one of the maker spaces here, one of the big companies has, and you see all these rolls of cloth on the shelves, amazing in their amazing maker space that they have, which my colleague Marcus Holmes helped set up. And they will pull out a roll of cloth and say, "That's cool." People say, "Yeah, that's cool. That's really cool. We have to use
that." Who says
that? And you say, "Why is it cool?" Well, it's just cool. Yeah. And there is no other way to explain why that cloth is cool than look at the cloth and touch the cloth. It's the only way to explain that. And that's very, very important in our lives and in our work, that there are very, very important factors that we can't attach words to. And the only way to experience those and communicate those and to make decisions around those is to do them and touch them.
Yeah, and experiment with them. And I know you're also a big fan of experimentation and iteration. I mean, can you maybe reflect on that a bit? Like maybe a few examples of explain a bit why you really believe in that?
Absolutely. Well, my background is theatre. And I've worked mostly in fairly small theatre companies, sometimes on large stages as well. And theatre is very, very good at iteration. And if we reflect on what theatre is for a moment, the first thing to say is that most of the theatre is not the stage. People always think of a red curtain. They think that's the theatre, but that's just the user interface, part of the user interface. In the State Theatre here in Nuremberg, the fantastic State Theatre here, we have about 50 people on stage, not counting the orchestra. And we have 500, 600 backstage, making it work. And this is an enormously pragmatic innovation machine. I mean, these places, they have to, even the tiny ones all around the world, they have to put out innovation on time, in budget, every 8 weeks. And they've been doing that for 3,500 years in China, 2,500 years in the West, and that's a very, very mature discipline. How do they put this stuff out there? How do technicians talk to artists, talk to front of house people, talk to salespeople, talk to the city government who are paying for part of this, talk to sponsors? There's massive different viewpoints on the world. How does that work? And a huge amount of it works through the principle of don't tell me, show me. Rehearse
with constant iteration and
constant
learning.
Iteration. And we rehearse a scene 50 times, 100 times, and it changes dramatically in that time. And sometimes it goes back to what it was.
What if you bit more like this, bit more like that?
Exactly. And sometimes it goes back to what it was 20 iterations ago. And was that wasted time? No, because it's given us colors and flavors we can use elsewhere.
So the value of experimentation on a specific contact moment or experience moment, that iteration is perfect, but that also you're talking about a lot of orchestration as well, like
Yes.
connecting all these things.
How
So
do
it's a
these things fit
combination, I guess,
together?
of optimizing and iterating, but also orchestrating, because if everybody runs in a different direction, then also the elements don't add up. So I mean, maybe a nice analogy. I spoke to Patrick Quattlebaum recently on his book Orchestrating Experiences that you probably, I'm sure you know. He also uses the movie direction as the analogy for creating a great customer experience in a corporate as well, because you need to coordinate everything, but also you need to orchestrate everything in that sense. So
I've been writing on dramatic arcs within experiences as well, which I think are very, very important. Aristotle, 2,500 years ago, talks about, my Greek is terrible, especially my ancient Greek, but it's a Greek word oikahedone, which is the proper pleasure. And Aristotle talks about how a story, it's in his book, Drama, how a story is successful not because of the elements, but because of the way they fit together. And I think that's very, very important for our experiences as well. There's often too much overload or too much quiet. What's the rhythm? Is it a pleasing rhythm of interaction, of engagement with a brand, with an experience? And there are some organizations who are very good at that. You might think about hospitality and so on, or things like theme parks and so on, who really thought like about balancing this thing. Balancing that and saying, where are the high points and where are the low points? It's not good and bad. It's thrill and chill. When do we want thrill? When do we want chill? And that is very, very important in experiences, I think.
So there's also like a right balance of interactions and engagement, and not overdoing it, but not underdoing it, I guess. To go back to that point of orchestration versus experimentation, I mean, we see a lot of demand and traction in journey management, and we work with the likes of Dedu, but also I know your co-author Mark Stickdorn has worked on journey management a lot. So that is really kind of like helping or facilitating like the orchestration of the entire customer journey. And then of course on each of these touch points, product owners and UX designers or service designers or what have you can really iterate on perfecting those specific touch points. Is that something you also active in those two aspects of experience orchestration?
Absolutely. And I think we come down to a very fundamental aspect of brand here, because as we know, every planned feature becomes a commodity. Carnot model, 1980s, things like this. We have something which is amazing, like, wow, free Wi-Fi in a hotel was amazing 15 years ago, and now it's, what do you mean there's no free Wi-Fi? It's a basic factor, a hygiene factor, you might call it. So all the things we do, all the things that we plan for, they do degrade. So we have to become this kind of endless innovation factory, which is, I think that's questionable how sustainable that is. But the thing which is always unique are people. And I think it's very, very important that the people who are at the front end, whether that's internal front end or an external front end, but the people who are delivering value at the coal face of value creation, if you like, that they need to have a degree of flexibility so they can be themselves. And this comes back to the theatre metaphor as well. When I've played a bit of Shakespeare in my time, when I play my Feste or something, or Macbeth or whatever, it's very different to somebody else's Macbeth, or they were saying the same words generally. The same sequence of events happen to us.
You can still perform it in a different way, you mean?
That's right. And if the director and I get this right, then the Shakespeare's words does not become a straitjacket, but it becomes a framework which I can climb up and fill with my own life. And I think it's very interesting to see the processes and so on, which we need to have in organizations in that terms, where they become something which lifts up the people and lets them show themselves in a way which is invariably unique, because people are unique.
Yeah, but I think you're also referring to a certain degree of autonomy, right? Of people in the front lines that can actually address a customer need and not being scripted completely.
Exactly.
And removing that personal connection with customers.
And what are the resources they have to do that, the permissions they have to do that, and in situations where every minute is counted and every hour has to be billable, it's very, very hard to do these things. We also know that customers really love it when they feel they got special treatment. There are those wonderful...
I was going to say, too many... We've seen cases... of course, every customer service department is being challenged on their operational excellence and can you do it cheaper and less calls. But these calls are also an opportunity. You're speaking to a customer. Huge. Why it's I think just still it's a fundamental mistake if you treat your customer service call as a cost item and not see it as an
100%.
opportunity to improve, because you're basically talking to them and you're
Yes.
like ignoring the opportunity to improve. I
And
mean,
on the other
that's
hand, you're paying thousands and thousands to recruit people for some kind of research program when they're calling you for free. Yeah.
yeah. And this, I guess this is, we know this, but it's that's a symptom, I guess, of siloed KPIs. I mean, if you treat this as a cost center, then of course you're trying to bring the cost down, but understanding that actually, if you understand why people call, then you can actually maybe address it indirectly instead of just talking to them shorter about their problem. I mean, that's not really going to help, is it?
No. I mean, what kind of relationship has that basis? We talk about the cost of customer relationships, and then I want to have a relationship with a friend of mine, but I try to shorten every conversation as much as possible. That's madness. I mean, no one would have wanted a friend like that. But we want to be not always friends. We want to be reliable partners of customers. I mean, it's very interesting what Zappos did in the 2000s and early 2010s, where they were, as I understand it, their phone workers, their hotline, their customer agents, and so on, were rewarded for the longer they spoke to a customer rather than the shorter. So the long conversations were rewarded higher because that's how you build loyalty.
I mean, that's the thing, right? Brand loyalty is ultimately a relationship. Like, people trust you as a brand, people like you as a brand, or people want to be, or want to stay because they know it's going to be okay. Yeah, like that. It's just like friends, basically. And if you're treated badly a few times, then you also disconnect with your friends. And if you know you can also always count on them, it's kind of like a good friend, right? So that's how loyalty works, I guess. And increasingly, we see that companies, especially in a commodity business, who know that they need some level of differentiation beyond price and product, are realizing this. And understanding if we don't want to be a price fighter, then we need to offer something else. And then we actually see this quite often, that a customer experience strategy is then triggered, because then they realize, okay, that's something we can actually differentiate on compared to our competition, which is a good thing, I guess. But
it certainly worked for Zappos. It was a very meteoric rise to success there, and then they sold to Amazon for lots and lots of money.
Yeah.
So,
And it's harder to replicate, So it's also something, if you really change that, like you say, the rules of operating and giving people in the front lines autonomy and change that whole mindset of customer centricity. That's not something like a feature. A competitor can copy a feature in a few months probably, but a culture, you can't. It takes a lot longer. Yeah. So
yes, I remember back in the 80s when I worked at Honda, late 80s, early 90s, there was, of course, it was a time of TQM, Toyota Total Quality Management, and everyone was like trying to figure out what Toyota was trying to do, how they were doing this, and they say, come and see, come and look, come and look. Yep. And people from other companies, like my own, as I understand it, Honda, went over and looked at it, and they saw everything that was going on, but were unable to replicate it because the culture was not there. Yeah. These processes were built on a bed of culture, which you had to have first.
So that's a lot of that is the operational side of it, and when you have the service and how do you execute it with the customer service and all that. And the other, on the front end of the journey, of course, there's like the brand and the marketing promise to customers. Like, what are the campaigns? I mean, you can, of course, promise fantastic things in a campaign. And also in your marketing messages and propositions online. Have you seen, maybe do you know any good examples of companies that have also mastered to connect that promise with the actual delivery? And so, because what we often see still is that we still have work to do to connect what's going out in marketing and brand with what's actually being delivered, and that we're trying to connect customer experience strategy or service design focus to more align with brand and marketing teams to make sure that it's a more holistic or coherent story that you're telling, and not like, okay, we promised this, so now how are we going to make it happen, which feels more reactive. Is there anything, maybe you have any anecdotes or examples there that or tangible tools that can help, that can reflect on that or add value here?
I think the most important one is understanding the journey. The journey includes all these, I don't use the word often, but all these touch points and many things in between the touch points, which are very, very important. And what my friends down the pub, say to me is much more important than your $30 million advertising campaign. So understanding that the storytelling that's going on and the actual experiences that I have with the brand are way, way more important than any obvious messaging, I think is the first step to that. I think it's also very charming when organizations don't push those expectations too high, when they're a little bit human around this. I mean, in the States, humble, yeah. In the States, there's that car rental company, Rent-A-Wreck. Their name is Rent-A-Wreck, and it's kind of joking. And then when a perfectly good car turns up, you're happy already. They already exceed your expectations,
and you believe them. Because
yes,
I think if it's over the top, you're like, yeah, whatever. Yeah, so like,
yeah, absolutely. In professional services, I work with a few of the companies there, and it's always very interesting. But if I say the human one, most folks will say, "Oh, you mean EY?" Yeah, they don't present themselves in quite the same way. They have a great expertise level. They all do, these people, But EY seem to be masterful at just being fun, being cool to work with, being relaxed to work with, at least in my experience of their customers. And I think that's very, very important, that we present ourselves as we are. And that doesn't always mean we have to pretend that we're the best, It means presenting ourselves as what we are and saying, this is where it fits your life.
I use this actually quite a lot internally with confident, not arrogant. Like,
yes.
I think it's important to come across as like, we really know what we do. We don't have to brag about it. Yeah. So like, it's more like important. I think nobody likes somebody's bragging.
No.
Like, that's really not going to help customer loyalty, is it? So, or a few people do, I guess. So. Yeah. Okay.
And then it's investing in the things that actually make the difference. Go on.
So does that mean, actually I've service designers, and not only service designers, but in that field, more and more actually become like a facilitator or orchestrator of these things, right? Rather than owning anything or being the researcher alone, right? It's almost like increasingly the skill of getting people together on the same page and having a more holistic perspective, if anything, right? So would you agree? Do you see that role changing if you reflect on the last 10 years and maybe the additions of your book?
Yeah, that would be a nice, if we could change the world in that way. I hope we've done some useful stuff with the book. But yes, I think there's been an awareness that this has grown in the last 10 years, that the kind of things that we work on involve all different parts of the organizations and things outside the organization, that those people speak different languages, have very different ideas around what good is or what finished is, and so on. And that helping those human beings to collaborate more effectively is an incredibly valuable calling, or valuable profession. And I see my specialization within service design as facilitation, and I see the role of a designer, of a manager, of a leader as a facilitative role, as in we make it easier for people to do things. And sometimes we difficultate, sometimes we make it harder, we challenge people as well, say, is that really good enough? Because I don't think it is. Seeing that, I think, is very rewarding for me. We see people hanging back more, not imposing themselves, but allowing teams and so on to develop what they need to develop. So they believe it's their own as well, because it is their own, genuinely their own. And rather than leading from the front, the classic sort of the graphic illustration of a leader as being usually a cis man on a cliff pointing, and all the people below running in that direction, as to being somebody who is actually genuinely supporting and helping people to discover, so on. That's a facilitative role, I think. And it's very interesting to see that become more and more core in the kind of work that we do. People, not just us, now saying that facilitation is the key skill of service design.
What I like, one specific element in that, what you said is having the conversation makes it sometimes harder. Yeah, but harder is better. And because I think walking around each other, avoiding the conversation that's actually the silo issue. Yeah, like if you all do your own thing and you shy away from having the tough conversations, then you're not balancing to find the best possible solution for things. Yeah, so
I think so, and also seeing the term conversation in a very wide way, because that conversation might need to be a series of experiments. That conversation might need to be listening in different places rather than where we're normally listening. So getting away from the word channel, which is so dominated by certain skill sets and certain types of person, towards a more pluralistic, triangulated way of decision making, I think is very important.
Yeah, and then even there also you can do that on a touch point level, but also on a journey level. Because I think we've just worked with a national railway company here, and we've done lots of small experiments in their web shop, and really with each iteration it improved, and it both improved in terms of customer experience, but also in revenue. Yeah, so I think hand in hand, of course, it's not customer or money, but customer is money, and so that was one. But we also see this on a journey level. To not only do this improvement iteration, but actually across the entire journey, cross-functionally align on, hey, which are the opportunities that we should actually address from marketing to customer service in a journey, and not, okay, marketing and everybody gets their pre-allocated budget to address what they feel is in their remit. And because then that might not be the right priorities across the entire journey. So what we see now is while service designers may have been the ones that kind of like stimulated and facilitated this journey perspective, it's also important that that journey doesn't become a design or customer experience only perspective, but actually the cases where we've seen it really be successful is if a journey owner has balances commercial, operational, and customer dimensions in their decision making, and that's rare. I mean, we haven't seen many organizations do this well. It's usually either a value chain commercially or a CX journey customer, but it being more balanced, the trade-off commercial, operational, and customer is still fairly rare, I would say, of companies who are doing that well.
It is. I mean, it's been talked about since the 2000s. People like Forrester and so on linking business metrics into journey and journey maps. I mean, Jim Kalbach's work is at various stages along that, whether it was the mapping work or the JTB jobs to be done work as well, of really integrating that. I think has been very important, but it's been slow for organizations to grasp it. And I think that's because we fundamentally see different worlds here. There are different skill sets. I used to work in advertising, don't hate me. And we used to have people who we called the creatives, the people who we called the suits, and they did not understand each other. And the suits were put there to stop the creatives doing weird stuff in front of the client. I've been in those meetings. And it's a pity that we see that, because we say, we're separating customer from business, but where does the business come from? And literally the money coming into the organization comes because the customer values something. And then why do we separate those things?
Does exist the organizational structures and the incentives and KPIs that are in place slow down that transition, because it's kind of like keeping it in place. So I think also you need the leadership to also say, okay, we are going, and that's to be very optimistic as well. We see a huge increase now in organizations asking us to take journey management from an operational level for a single proposition to kind of like seeing a journey as a map of insights, to really to like a governance perspective, to say, okay, we're going can we engage with marketing and customer service to kind of like plot our improvement opportunities. And then of course it becomes a roadmap discussion and not a customer insight only discussion. And that's actually an advantage, I think, also for us designers and researchers, because now your insights are actually part of the conversation that you have with the other disciplines. So, but it takes transformation and change management, and in big organizations it's not easy, like you said. It is complex, but so is agile transformation, and so was a digital transformation. They were also not easy to do.
And we can learn a lot from what those colleagues went through as well. I mean, especially the agile experience of moving from a sort of linear waterfall thinking to an iterative experimental thinking. Well, that really paved the ground for what we're talking about here. And then finding ways to govern that and to use that strategically is exactly what we're looking at now.
Comes really back to your doing element, I think, that I like, because I think that's when you need, the companies that have been successful in those transformations have not underestimated the change management and the coaching. Yeah, because if you just implement it and walk away, it's going to fail, right? Forget if you really support it from the top with incentives and KPIs, but also support it on the working floor with coaching and iteration, that's when it really, I guess, is successful. And then we also see this, that just like you had agile coaches and you had maybe coaches for other working forms in digital transformations or guiding programs, the same we see with journey management. If you just think you can license the tool and provide a template, it doesn't help because all the questions immediately pop up around governance, reporting, who does what, who owns what. You basically kind of like paralyze the whole thing. And we've seen that if you really start small with a pilot and then scale, coach, implement, learn, best practice sharing, this is really like more successful. So it really actually comes back to your statement around doing is really important to make it stick. Yeah, so like
it is. And the challenge there is that organizations think they have to understand a thing before they do it. And that's the opposite of what we're talking about in things like prototyping. In prototyping, you do something to understand it. If you talk about the complexity theory people, when you're dealing with a complex system, the only way to start to understand it is to interact with it, to push and see what happens, and then push again in different directions.
It's actually the other way around. Yeah. Okay.
Yes. And that's often a big block, is that organizations don't want to try a thing until they think they've thought everything through. But these are too complex for us to think them through. And we don't know the effects either of the first push that we make. That's just unforeseeable. So having a safe way, a responsible way in which to run experiments, to try stuff, to push here and to push there and figure it out,
100%.
That's essential.
Yeah. Also, in terms of organizational inertia, right? But also, we've seen... we've actually learned it the hard way as well. We've also had clients where we rolled out journey management in multiple departments at the same time. And there's just no patience in the organization to wait 6 months for it to show results, right? And now what we're doing is really starting with a very tangible, specific business problem, run a journey project on that, show impacts fast, and then say, hey, this worked. And then, of course, you got management is a lot easier to excite about scaling it further, because you've kind of proven it because by taking a smaller scope, you actually can move faster. But you've also de-risked it, because I think you basically can work with. I mean, Steve Jobs said, if I have a big and very important project, I make a smallest possible team, which is I think very interesting that he says, like, the more people you engage, the more complicated it also becomes to achieve results in the short run, I guess. Not sure. Do you recognize that also?
Absolutely. My colleague Mark Stickdorn, you mentioned him before. He talks about the importance of when you're embedding journey management or even just journey work into organizations, the importance of starting with what he calls them under the radar projects. So can you do a thing which is going to be noticed by the organization if it goes well, but if it goes wrong, because sometimes things do wrong, we're figuring things out. That's a negative experimental result is going to happen. If it does go wrong, it doesn't burn a customer relationship. It doesn't burn, any real business.
That's another one.
So he talks about doing things like the expense system inside the organization, or fixing the line at lunch. I mean, really, really basic stuff. But when it works, you can say, we did that using these methods. Here they are. They're on the wall.
But also something you can get away with. If it fails, it doesn't.
If it doesn't make anything worse, at least. Yeah, exactly. And this is a very important theatrical concept as well. In theatre, we talk about safe space and the rehearsal room. In the rehearsal room, I decide what leaves the room. And that's very unfamiliar to most organizations, but it's incredibly important when you're doing new things to not feel there are too many eyes on you. Yeah,
but also not in a like isolated innovation lab. So I think the value is of it experimenting in practice with real results. That's also, I think, proven that that's very hard to bring it back into the business if it's really developed in isolation. So, but I think choosing something that is not risking the business or the customer relationship is probably a smart choice indeed.
I think so. I mean, labs are a thing in themselves. Lots of organizations, they say that a budget is how organizations show love. So when you see a flashy innovation lab has been built, they're in love with something. The question is, what are they in love with? But I'm much more interested in things that can be done at every desk in every part of the organization, because that's where it has to work in the long run.
Yeah, of course, if you do some completely blue ocean innovation that is completely separate from your current running business, then of course you can do it. But I think typically 90% of the work is optimizing or evolving or adding to your current business. So then in those cases, I think it's cool. All right. Well, Adam, we're almost running to the end of the episode. Is there, now that we've been speaking about this, is there another guest that you would really recommend, now knowing what we talk about and what the core of focus of this podcast is? Is there another guest that you would really recommend I invite to be a guest on the show.
I think she might break your format, but I would recommend that you
Whatever.
you talk.
I'm quite open to it. Yeah.
I think recommend you could talk to a person called Belina Raffi. Belina Raffi is an extraordinary person, a facilitator, a very, very talented supporter of humans and people. And what Belina talks about at the moment is very interesting. It's a collision between complexity, which we've been talking about, and comedy. Because Belina runs a thing called Sustainable Stand-Up, which is how she helps people to talk more about things that are very important to them, or talk better about things that are important to them, by showing them the funny side of it. Not to trivialize the thing, but to make the thing more accessible and more approachable for other people who can be quite put off otherwise if you're very enthusiastic about something. So Belina Raffi is Sustainable Stand-Up. I'm not sure how much she thinks about brand and stuff like that. She comes from an MBA background, Citibank and stuff like that, but she spent the last years, she improvised her way around planet Earth. She's now working with complexity people, often in kind of earth science, space science, sustainability fields, which is awesome. But she's an extraordinary person. I think you'd like meeting her.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be brand related. I mean, I think the core focus is really the cross-functional collaboration. It can be any of the functions, and really anything that works to improve that is something we're looking forward to speak about. All right, so Adam, can I ask you to maybe leave the audience with your advice on maybe any people in the audience, most likely also like some service designers maybe that follow you, any advice in their work on how to help achieve and be impactful in their daily work?
Yeah, happy to. Just a reminder that we have to do stuff, that when we do stuff rather than talking about stuff, that we learn far more, and that we include other people who might not be so strong on the verbal or the written channel, but who can show us stuff and who can take us through stuff. So fight for permission to get out and hang out with your users, fight for permission to run experiments, fight for the time and the space and the budget to do that kind of stuff, because it makes such a difference.
Yeah, and make room for experimenting things, because you might also learn things that you don't know yet. And I like your point on also, that way enabling people who are less vocal to show their skills, because I didn't think about that, but that's actually a very good point as well, because there's a lot of people that are super talented, but maybe not the most vocal ones in the meetings. But when you're doing stuff, actually surface their value very much.
Very much so. I've seen that again and again and again, especially when we're working with customers, clients, citizens, and so on. A lot of those don't have the typical business skills of standing in front of a whiteboard,
pitching
or
their
abstraction,
idea,
or even literacy. Yeah, we're very lucky that most of us find that pretty easy. Many of us don't, and to be able to have other ways for those people to bring in their, I know it sounds trite, but it's wisdom. Bring in their wisdom and experience through other channels that are not quite so much based on words. I found it to be extraordinarily useful.
Wonderful. I think many people will take that on board, and hopefully they put it in practice, as you say, and then we can expect great results. So thanks, Adam, for being on the show.
Thank you, Harold.
And
thank you very much.
Looking forward to see you around on LinkedIn and conferences and what have you. Cheers.
I'll see you down the road.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Bye. So that was another episode of the Promise Podcast, where we discuss effective ways for brands to deliver on their promise with a great customer experience and business impact. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, or leave a review. Check haroldlammers.com for more great content. Hope to see you again in the next episode. Until then, keep pushing to deliver on the promise.